you said.
Yep, I'm ready.
All right, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. So we'll begin with some words from Chuck Souls.
So this is a little different venue for this board. We are televising it, or we are recording it. It'll be on YouTube. I just wanted to let you know that, and then I also want to let you know, please speak clearly and into the mic. When you turn to the side and you talk to somebody, it doesn't get picked up as well. So address your comments forward and speak into the mic.
So we're going to go ahead and mix up the agenda just a little bit. We'll start with the skydive issue with the parachute procedures draft and the minimum standards draft. So that way the guests can get their things going and they don't have to stay through the boring part of the meeting.
Okay?
So,
I just real briefly. So the city received a letter from the FAA that told us that they thought that we had 3 areas basically that we could allow skydiving activities. That was back in January. The city commission asked the board to develop some policies and some guidelines for allowing parachute activities to occur at the Lawrence Municipal Airport. The board identified a subcommittee, and the subcommittee met for about 2 or 3 months, several times over that period of time. Gary Knudsen was the chair of that group. I'm going to let him go into more detail. Tonight, what your item on the agenda is to receive any public comment with respect to those draft guidelines. They were posted with the agenda out there on the web for everybody to take a look at. And tonight, what you're here to do is to receive those public comments. The board has a number of options after you receive those public comments. You can discuss those public comments if you would like. You can refer those comments back to the subcommittee to review and maybe bring back some revisions, if appropriate, to the board. Or you can pass this on to the city commission as they're proposed by the subcommittee. So with that, I'm just going to let Gary go ahead and maybe go over a little bit more of this. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Thank you, Chuck. The subcommittee was formed to examine the issue of parachute activities at the airport and to come up with a set of recommended procedures and practices to allow this activity to take place. There were 4 of us on the subcommittee. Chuck Sewell, of course, our Director of Public Works, was on the committee. Rick Bryant, who is a former member of the Aviation Advisory Board and now the airport's consultant. Jeff Long, who's sitting to my left, who's the Director of Aviation for KU, and myself. I have been involved with aviation professionally most of my adult life. And in my various jobs in aviation, among other things, I worked in the aviation insurance industry for over 20 years and worked as an aviation safety officer for the state of California. Our objective in looking at these procedures is to come up with a set of procedures and policies that will allow parachuting to take place at the airport in a safe and professional manner. Most of you in the room, if not all of you, are aware of the fact that aviation is a fairly unforgiving activity and that mistakes in aviation usually tend to result in rather dramatic consequences. Unfortunately for me, in my career, I got to see some of those consequences in a very up-close way. And so I've become very sensitive to the issue of safety because I've seen the very dire consequences of what happens when mistakes are made in aviation. So this set of recommended policies and procedures was developed over a period of time. We put well over 150 hours into this thing. We consulted with a lot of outside entities who know quite a bit about the subject. And we think that these policies and procedures are a good foundation for allowing this activity to proceed in a safe manner. So we look forward to receiving your comments, and that's all I have to say on the subject for now.
Okay.
Mr. Chair. I also want to let the board know that when we finished with our draft policies and procedures, I did forward them on to the FAA. I have inquired of the FAA if they've had any comments. I have not received any to date, pending, what the board decides tonight. And I did let them know that the board was going to consider these tonight. And pending what the board decides tonight, we'll continue to ask for input from the FAA. But at some point, our goal is to get back to the commission with a recommended policy and set of procedures.
Thank you. Okay, with those introductions made, we open it to public comment. So those that wish to have some voices heard or have their comments made, we appreciate your input. If you could state your name, I think there's a sign-in sheet on the board over there. So,
My name is Matthew Fall. I'm a resident of Lawrence. I live at 1003 Lawrence Avenue. I am a licensed skydiver. I hold a C-rated license, and I jump, pretty regularly. The first thing I want to do is commend the City of Lawrence and you, the board of the airport, for taking this issue on and being willing to at least discuss it and get that out into the open, and your willingness to consider it, and the work that you're doing on this. I appreciate it as someone who enjoys the sport. Just in looking at your draft, I think in my mind there's not a whole lot of problems with that. There are one or two that may need to be tweaked, and so I'll bring some of those up. Number 4, no parachute operations shall be permitted at night. The USPA D license, which there are a series of licenses that skydivers earn over time that you can be qualified for, and different ratings that you can be qualified for. The specific licenses are A, B, C, and D, D being the highest rated license. In order to obtain that license, a skydiver has to have made at least 2 night jumps. It's a requirement by the USPA in order to be able to be considered a D-class skydiver. And I believe normally what would happen at a drop zone is that the drop zone would file a waiver. They would have a scheduled night in which they would be performing night jumps. They would file a waiver with the FAA ahead of time, and a certain amount of time before that evening comes. There are other regulations that they have to have, that everybody go through a briefing with their safety and training official on the drop zone. The USPA has very specific guidelines of what is required during night jumps. For example, wearing a visible beacon that's visible for, I think, two or more statute miles. So there are some very serious procedures that are required for making that. But that would be something I would ask you to reconsider if a drop zone is allowed on the premises, and they are going to be a school and they're going to be training people. That would be something that they would need to do in order for able to offer a full level of training for skydiving procedures. Number 5, the 2 nautical mile radius. I'm not sure if that was meant for skydivers, or if that includes the aircraft and their flight pattern for going on jump run. As you guys know, pilots, 2 miles is not very much, and if you're trying to climb, turning at a very tight radius, decreases your ability to climb at an efficient speed. So I'm not sure if that's what is meant by that language, but it may be just that you need some more clarification. Some other things that I noticed is requiring a log of jump operations. That's standard procedure, but you might need to clarify exactly who that needs to be sent to. I know that the airport's very busy, the city's very busy. There may be some just logistical problems about who they're communicating and who they're providing the reports to, and exactly when those reports need to be provided, either at the end of a weekend or at the end of the week. Drop zones can be pretty busy, just like any other business when they're conducting operations, and so they're focused on safety and making sure that everything runs smoothly. If it's required to submit that after or before each jump run, that would be very time consuming and would actually possibly hurt the business. Operators often calculate their profitability by how many jump loads per hour that they can fly. And if you have to register with the city before each load, that is going to delay their amount of time that they have to spend on the ground before, providing their service. So people pay for that jump. The more loads that you can fly, the more people you're flying and putting in the air. So that's something that would definitely affect the business itself. So it's just something to keep in mind. Other than that, I think Lawrence would be a wonderful place. And I, as a skydiver, and I know all the places that I skydive are extremely focused on safety and seamless operation with all the other businesses at the airports that they're located at. And I personally do not go to drop zones that don't have a good reputation. Right now, Osage City shut down. That was my home drop zone while Skydive Kansas was open. I'm driving to Skydive Kansas City, which is an hour and 20-minute drive for me. There's actually a closer drop zone, but their reputation is one of not necessarily having the best safety practices. I don't go there. I'll drive another 45 minutes extra on my time, and most skydivers are in that category. And by most, I would say 99.9%. As Gary mentioned, skydiving is an aviation activity, and we are in the business to keep doing it, not to increase our risk. So safety involves safety not only for skydivers but other businesses, and that goes along with the seamless work with other businesses that may be at the airport. So we're concerned for their safety, their equipment, and the surrounding area. And that's really standard practice for the vast majority of skydiving. Skydiving has been in existence for a good part of more than half a century, more than that. And the safety standards have been improved upon a whole lot in that time. And there's been a lot of, just like aviation, learning through air and road that has gone into developing our practices and developing our procedures. And the USPA has a very, very good and clear set of guidelines. So as long as your drop zone is adhering to that, and you know that person is the right person, that the owner is the right owner, and they're running things safely, I think you're going to have a really good business match. I think it would be great for the Lawrence community. It's another way to also bring people into Lawrence, into downtown, and to expand the local economy. It's another way to add to the diversity of what Lawrence and Douglas County has to offer for things that people can do and enjoy here. And it's a way to bring people internationally. Skydiving is now an international sport, and there's people from all over the world who travel and enjoy the sport and like to travel around and go to different places and jump. So it's something just that can add to the richness of the culture of Lawrence and the airport. But it does need to be done right, and I'm glad you guys are focused on that. Thank you for your time.
Matt, thank you.
Man, I just have one question. Would you be opposed to us contacting you if we wanted to have some additional dialogue about?
Not at all.
Okay, thank you.
Please, yeah. Thank you.
Appreciate Matt. And next speaker, anybody?
I'm Rodney Moore. I live at 3603 West 10th Street, and I've been associated with the airport for over 30 years. And formerly ran the flight training operation there. Still do that part-time because I don't know any better, but I am a full-time corporate pilot now, flying a corporate jet out of Kansas City. And I just assume, just my personal opinion, would not have soon not have this discussion because I don't feel that Lawrence Airport is a proper airport with the jet operations we have to have the skydiving. I know you've already had that thing, but to get my opinion in. And just I guess what I'm going to say is if you need to have a drop zone there, I would recommend that you put it as far away from the 1533 as you possibly can and as far away from the ramp as you can. And what we've had lately is about, in the last couple of years, we've been to Cape Fear, North Carolina, where they do have a skydiving operation. And it seems like every time we go in and out of there, we have an issue. And the last time we went in there is now the last time we went in there. Because the second to last time we went in, the airplane was sitting on the ramp, started up, began to taxi, and all of a sudden had parachutes landing all around us on our aviation ramp and with the engines running. And I don't need to, those of you involved in aviation, if we pull a canopy into one of those engines, we do things in multiples of 100,000s. So quite a bit of liability there, even if we didn't hurt anyone other in the airplane. What finished it off and made the operator of the airplane pretty unhappy when we told him we weren't going anymore is last time I was there, we were lined up. I was at full power running down the runway, and I had a parachute come down in front of me on the runway, and at the last second, dodged off into the safety area, and of course at that point I was shut down and in an aborted takeoff. And again, when you get enough airplane moving that fast, an aborted takeoff is not anything we take real lightly. So at this point, we're just simply not going to go back and play with those conditions. So it's going to make the operator, instead of at Cape Fear, it's going to make him have to go to Wilmington. He's not very happy about that, but it's just kind of what we told him it's going to have to be. And I don't think it takes very many of those issues for somebody who's operating in out of here to decide the same thing.
Yeah, thank you, Rod.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? Sweet.
Hello, my name is Ron Renz. I operate several businesses at the Lawrence Airport. I'm in the airplane testing business. I operate experimental airplanes and have operated airplanes all over the world. I've been doing that for about 40 years. We always get into unusual operations because of the kind of business I am. And I'm very cognizant of the mix of the type of operations. In my operation, we don't take a jet airplane into a little airport where there's all kinds of little traffic because the speeds are different and all that other stuff. I've also been involved in the city's airport for the past 35 years, past chairman of the Chamber of Commerce Aviation Committee, which we used to have, and have been very actively, as you board members know, coming to the aviation board meetings. The city has spent millions of dollars positioning the airport to be the kind of facility that it currently is. The airport attracts numerous businesses and private aircraft operators because of that investment. The city benefits significantly because of the attractive portal the airport is to this city and the airport presents. Parachute operations are not compatible with that objective and will distract from that objective, as you just heard. Secondly, I believe that public comments to the current minimum procedures and airport parachute operations are premature. We've submitted those to the FAA. You've submitted those to the FAA has still not come back to you. When the FAA does come back, I think this will have to be repeated again because I suspect that the FAA will require changes and you'll want comments to those again. The City Commission has requested that you draft changes to the minimum standards and that you draft parachute operations because of a misunderstanding between the city and the FAA. The city believes that the FAA has told the city that you have to allow parachute operations here. The FAA has not done that. The FAA has not directed the city to do that, and my recommendation is you do not do that because parachute operations here are not compatible. Why are they not compatible? Lawrence Airport's a high-use facility. You've got airplane operations that are not very compatible with parachute operations. We don't want injuries or fatality when an aircraft or a parachute jumper collide. Aside from the tragedy of that kind of an event, the city, as the airport operator, will have liability when that happens. I guarantee it. I'm an expert witness on many airplane accident cases, and I understand who gets sued when there's something happens. The city will have liability. You better increase your insurance. Lifestar Helicopter operates at the airport on a very short notice dispatch requirement. Parachute operations will affect their operations. Their response time will be longer because of that. That could cost lives. I think somebody from Lifestar will maybe address that later, I don't know. Corporate aircraft fly regularly into the airport. Many corporate operators will not fly into an airport with parachute operators. You've just heard from one. We had a similar issue when the city went to put an ILS facility into the airport. There were a number of corporate operators that would not come to the airport without an ILS landing facility. The city spent millions of dollars putting an ILS in the facility so that we can attract those kind of operators. Now we're preparing to put up a not wanted sign for the kind of operators that we have now coming to this airport. It's just the wrong kind of message to send out. We've got a lot of training airplanes operating at the airport. You've got inexperienced pilots that are just struggling to figure out how to learn and fly an airplane, how to operate in the airspace and all that other stuff. The last thing they need is a complication of parachutes flying around them and how to deal with a parachute operator. It's just not a good safety practice. There will be an incident, I can almost guarantee it. Parachute jumpers don't really understand ground operations. They're going to land on parts of the airport that are not the designated drop zone. It just happens, especially with training parachute operators. They haven't quite yet figured out how to control the parachute, just like a student pilot hasn't quite yet figured out how to control the airplane. That will happen. They're going to land in parts of the airport. They're going to land on the runways. They're going to run off the runways. They're going to have to figure out how to cross the runways. It's just not a good situation. A better facility for parachute operation is an airport that's not got the kind of traffic mix that we have here. Good examples in very, very close proximity to Lawrence, Finland Valley Aerodrome, Ottawa Airport. Those are good places for this kind of an operation, not Lawrence. Again, I'm talking about this from a safety consideration standpoint. Where are we going to put the jump zone? The FAA has issued some safety recommendations for parachute drop zones, and there's going to be quite a bit of difficulty to find a place to put a drop zone that is compatible and safe. Even if a safe drop zone does get established, jumpers will regularly land outside the drop zone, not just the student jumpers. Even very experienced jumpers very regularly land outside the drop zone because of wind, unexpected things going on. It just happens. It will happen. Don't expect that it won't happen. Parachute operators have also been ejected from surrounding airports with drop zones for the following reasons. Wamego, Kansas. There were so many parachute operations going on there that they started discouraging other aircraft operators from coming to the airport because the parachute jumpers were all over the airport. They did not follow the procedures that were established. Wamego tried and worked with that airport for 7 to 10 years to try to get back to change. It did not change. The parachute jumper operations were camping regularly on the airport grounds, even though that was not allowed. There's nothing in the proposed minimum standards to address that. Alcohol use. Alcohol use and aviation are not compatible. The Wamego parachute operation had significant problems with that, and that's one of the reasons they were ejected from the airplane. And then somebody died. A jumper at the operation there dropped out of the parachute. He didn't survive. That was probably not a very safe parachute operator. I like the fact that if we're going to have an operator here, we're going to have some very, very specific rules. They need to be good rules. They need to be rules that will be enforced. That's critical, or somebody's going to get hurt. You heard from a parachute operator who will not go to an operation that is not safe. It's a good idea. Ottawa. The Ottawa Stage Pro event property has ejected a parachute operator. Why? Because a jumper died at their facility during the event that they had. USPA guidelines were not followed during that event. I don't see anything in the draft standards to talk about USPA guidelines, their basic rules, and their suggested safety rules. That must be in your standards. It's really important. I put some very specific comments that I didn't think I was going to be at the meeting, and I sent to specific comments to the draft and the draft standards. I won't repeat those because those are in the record and you have those already. But I've got a couple of other ones to add. Specifically, the U.S. Parachute Association basic safety requirements, what they call their BSRs, compliance, should be mandatory and referenced in your policies and procedures, and any operator that operates here should be required to follow every single one of those. It's really important. Not just the basic standards and recommendations, but also all of their safety recommendations. Likewise, compliance should be mandatory, and that should be specified in your draft procedures, specifically so they must be followed. Automatic activation devices should also be mandatory for all parachute operations. What an automatic activation device is, if the parachutist gets below a certain altitude, the parachute will automatically be deployed. That's important. I wear parachutes in my test operations from time to time. I have an automatic operation device on my parachute in case there's something that I'm incapacitated or something when I have to get out of an airplane. So far, I've not had to use either the parachute or the automatic activation device. Thank you very much. I hope that my recommendations are taken into account.
Thank you, Ron. Any questions?
Mr. Renz, you mentioned that you have a number of businesses at the airport. How many
3.
that are operating on?
Yes, I operate a company called Alligator Incorporated. That's my flight test engineering company that we do. We've been in business for almost 30 years, and I've been at the airport as a tenant at the airport since 1987. My company operated the very first jet airplane to ever operate out of the Lawrence Airport. We've done a number of test programs here when we can. Usually the airplanes I operate we can't bring here. Lawrence isn't big enough, but we have in the past when we could. I also operate another facility called Gutworks. We're in the airplane modification, airplane exporting business, and we also lease some space from that airport facility. I also own a company called JR Aero Leasing, which owns an airplane that is based at the Lawrence Airport. I base 2 aircraft at the Lawrence Airport with my companies.
What kind of craft?
I have a Piper Seneca, which is a six-place twin-engine airplane that I use for transportation, and I have a Christian Eagle aerobatic biplane, which is my training aircraft to keep me safe when things don't go right in an airplane the way they're supposed to. And I can say that because I fly that airplane, I'm alive twice. We also operate, I do a lot of product support for Mitsubishi aircraft, and we regularly bring in Mitsubishi turboprop airplanes into the Lawrence Airport.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe. Welcome.
Lloyd Hetrick at 805 Diamond Head Drive. As the FBO operator, I don't think anything, I can't say any more than Ron just stated. I'm not in favor of having them, but that's not why we're, I guess, here to go over more of what the guidelines are gonna be, but there's no doubt they'll affect our business out there. Most of our business drives off of jet traffic. If we start losing those, then it's gonna affect our revenue and our business as well. But I briefly kind of looked through some of these. If it's there and I didn't see it, I apologize, but on your first page with that paragraph 3, you make mention of, we talk about getting a 60-day notification. I think it is, if you're gonna have a function or something. It's something in writing, advance for temporary suspension. I wonder if, or on the traffic, I don't know, ball games, we obviously know when they're gonna be there. Those would be high volume traffic. But we've had some instances, we didn't even know we were gonna have that kind of traffic until that day of. The basketball camp was one this last summer where they brought in all of those coaches from all over the country, came in, and we just started hearing about that about a day of, kind of thing. So I don't know if there just might be something there that if something pops up that would be to where we wouldn't want parachuting operations going on, we should be able to maybe have some guidelines that's not necessarily 60 days out, because we may not know about some of that stuff until the traffic develops. I think on the liability issue, I think in paragraph 11, the city obviously wants a release from their liability. As the FBO operator, I would like to see that something in there to protect us. Because we've got liability where we pull a customer out of their hangar for departure, and we got him sitting there on the ramp, and parachuter lands on top of it. We were the last one to park him. I don't know if that would play an issue, or we've got customers with cars out in the parking lot, same issue. Something hits there or land. I just feel like maybe somehow, as the FBO operator, we would want to be included in some sort of, I obviously carry insurance, but I just wonder if we wouldn't have as much risk as the city does too. We talk about, I don't know what's involved with paragraph 14, which is a good idea. Obviously we need to be involved with, you're talking the daily briefing. Obviously we need to be involved so we know what's going on, but that just sounds like more work on our behalf too. On I think 18, you're talking about maybe that's the one where I'm sidetracking, the 60 days prior on event type of thing. Is there gonna be any kind of a guidelines in here where someone gets a permit, it's only good for so long, in case we have issues with an operator? Could we say that their permits are only good for 60 or 90 days or whatever that may be, and then they're up for reevaluation at that point? In case we have issues, then we're not locked into something.
So you're talking about the normal everyday operator for commercial operation?
Yeah, commercial operator.
Would they
Yeah.
be on such a short
Yeah.
deal? I'm not sure that would be one. It would definitely be one for a special event.
Yeah, the purpose of that one, that item, was in the event that a parachute operator wanted to have a large gathering of parachutes, like a regional gathering or
Oh, okay.
something that was above and beyond the scope of their normal operations. So if they were going to have a lot of jump aircraft, a lot of jumpers, more than normal, we'd want some advance notice of that. That's
Okay.
what the intent of that one was, if that clarifies a little
Okay,
bit for you.
yeah, no, it does. Again, I guess then that would probably fall back to where if a commercial operator came in here, they'd have a lease in with the city. And I guess then it'd go back to something, what I'm saying there is that hopefully that lease would be contained in where if we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing, we can, because I've heard of stores at other places, they just can't get rid of them. Once they're kind of in, and if they cause problems, it's hard to get rid of them. And that's just, I hate to be locked into where everybody goes out of business at the airport just because we can't take care of that. One other thing, I think it might be, maybe you're filling it out in the operations, but as the gentleman mentioned here, their biggest concern is to get up and down as quick as they can. I know that, because that's where the dollars is. But I would like to see that we stay within the limits of the airport traffic area, that we're courteous to other traffic as they're coming and going, and we don't have the airplane dipping in and cutting somebody off on final just because they gotta get on the ground to get back up, and they didn't do their standard entry into the pattern and stuff. So that guideline, I know it's a recommendation from FAA standpoint, but there are safety issues with that. We ran into that a little bit with in '97 when we hosted the aerobatic competition. We've had instances where people just come in and zipped right in front of somebody on the final, and so I'd just be concerned from a safety issue there that we contain that. I do know I've got jet operators that probably won't come in if this happens, but you know, to say how that number is, I don't know. But if we're just doing a event from here to there type of thing, then you know, we can work around that type of thing. And I think that may be partly maybe what you're addressing here, that we at least have everybody on the same page with what they can do and can't do. And the drop zone, as Ron mentioned, I don't know where it would go, to be honest with you, to keep it. Last thing we need to do is have them landed on the apron, the taxiway, runway, anywhere of that nature, so. Okay, thank you.
Any questions for Lloyd?
No, thank you, Lloyd.
Any more public comment? Okay, great.
Greg Hildenbrand, I'm Executive Director of Lifestar. I just came to comment on the process more than anything, but I will just reiterate the testimony that I've given before the City Commission, which basically in a nutshell is I have nothing against skydivers or skydive operators or people who enjoy doing that. I'm sure it's great fun. But I still believe as an emergency services responder that the activities are incompatible. Part of what we do is part of our obligation is to respond as quickly when we get a call to a medical emergency as safely possible. And we do have experience with Skydive Kansas. They were a great operation. We enjoyed coexisting for several years, but the fact is that there were several times each year, 2 or 3, that we would have to delay our response, sometimes up to 15 or 20 minutes, until we had confirmation that all the skydivers were on the ground. We will not start a helicopter until we have confirmation that all skydivers are on the ground for their safety and for ours. And 15 or 20 minutes may not sound too long. I mean, our average time to get off the ground is 8 to 10. But if you're the person having the heart attack or bleeding out on Interstate 70, or having a stroke or something, that 10 or 15 or 20 minutes is an unacceptable delay for an entertainment activity. And so our opposition is not with the activity itself, it's just with the activity at the same airport that we're operating an emergency service out of. With regard to the standards, to the rules, I had the opportunity to sit in with Gary and Jeff and the subcommittee on 1 or 2 of their meetings, and I thought they were very thorough. I thought they did a great job. I appreciate Ron's comments. I'm not deeply schooled enough in aviation to know some of those kinds of details, but I certainly would not want to see the Aviation Committee move on this ahead of the FAA. And because it would be my hope that unless the FAA tells the city that they're going to lose funding or some other catastrophic consequence, that the Aviation Committee wouldn't even recommend establishing a drop zone. Again, for the reasons that I said, not because I have anything against skydiving. So yeah, I think the subcommittee did a great job. I commend them on it. Obviously, there's still some more work to be done, but I appreciate the work.
Thank you, Greg. Any questions for Greg? Greg, we appreciate you coming in.
Thank you.
and The work you guys do. Any more public comment?
Good evening, my name is William McCauley, and I'm one of the people that have submitted a request to land parachutes on the airport. And where to start tonight? I think first I'd like to address some very unfounded accusations brought up
Okay.
by Ron over here, claiming that operations in the Stage Pro event did not follow the United States Parachute Association recommendations or guidelines or BSRs or whatever you want to call them. And in fact, there's nothing remotely true to that comment. The United States Parachute Association Central Regional Director, Mr. Gary Peak, was present at my request at that operation. And if you Google my name and that event, you'll find out that the FAA found that there was absolutely no violation of any FAA regulation during that event. I didn't push that man from an airplane. He didn't violate any FARs when he jumped from that airplane. I simply provided that man a ride to altitude. And what happened after he left that aircraft and the time he landed on the ground is between God and that man and the findings of the FAA and the Franklin County Sheriff's Department. So if you want to do your homework on that, or you can listen to this guy. So I hate to set the tone so negatively, but when people come up and make unfounded accusations about something that they weren't present at and know nothing of, that's pretty slanderous, to say the least. So these proposed draft policies, can I ask if any of these policies would pertain to any other operators on the airport?
This is taking public comment, so
Uh,
we're absorbing what
okay.
you want.
So-
So we'll take that.
So I'm going to
into consideration.
assume that this does not, for example, no night operations, that wouldn't apply to anyone else on the airport. Is that my understanding of this draft?
The draft is for parachute activities.
Okay. Well, let's see here. On number one, parachute operators must meet all requirements applicable to the federal aviation regulations, included but not limited to 61, Part 61, 91, 65, Part 91 is repeated, 105, and 119. All of that is standard operating procedures for parachute operations conducted under the federal aviation regulations. Standard operating procedure. And the people that enforce that is the FAA. No parachute operations should be permitted at any time that a TFR restriction is in effect at the airport. Again, that would be an FAA function. There is a waiver available for certain types of operations in a TFR issued flight area. So for a policy, to set policy that goes above an FAA function, I think is a little out of line. Number 3, during airport special events that may result in increased use of transient aircraft, the City of Lawrence may temporarily curtail the use of the airport for parachute operations. And the operator would be given notice in advance in writing of any such temporary suspension of the operator's approval to use this airport. Again, that comes back to the question of, is any other type, kind, or class of operator or operations subject to this airport policy? And I think you need to take a look at exclusive rights. If the answer to that is yes, we're the only ones. And I would also have you take a look at advisory circulars that discuss who can land on an airport. 105 sport parachuting, advisory circular 105, .2E, it's the recent one, states clearly that parachutes landing on airports, while airports may designate a suitable parachute landing area, skydivers will attempt to land in such areas, and has been pointed out at some point in time, inadvertent landings off of the drop zone will occur. For example, an emergency, such as an emergency in an airplane might require an airplane to land in an OFA or an RSA instead of the runway. These other grass areas are hard surface areas. This could include landings on runways, taxiways, and other hard surface areas. Areas such as runways, taxiways, clearways, and obstacle-free zones, or OFZs, are not prohibited areas. However, they should not be designated as the primary landing area and should be vacated as soon as practical. Flying parachutes over runways at low altitude should be avoided where possible. These are the types of things that this gentleman talked about the parachutists go through and learn in the ground school and the first jump course, and through their continued education as they go through the programs of becoming a licensed skydiver. Whether it's the A license, the B license, C license, or D expert, such as myself. So here again, you're setting a policy that's trying to out-talk what the FAA suggests should be the protocol. It also talks about transient aircraft and how that skydiving operations take place on airports that have glider activity, medical helicopters, crop dusting, flight training, corporate jets, private jets, ultralights, to suggest that only our activity should be curtailed because transient aircraft might fly into the airport is a little far-fetched. How is it any less dangerous for my skydiving operation of experienced, highly qualified skydivers who not only have expert licenses but have professional parachute exhibition ratings? In other words, a qualification that allows me to land on the 50-yard line down there at the Chiefs Stadium. I've proven that time and time again to the FAA that I'm qualified to do that. So to suggest that I can't land in a landing area on your airport because Mr. Booth's coming in his jet is preposterous. Or that certain people want to have a Make-A-Wish Foundation flight. It's been suggested before as that was the reason we couldn't use the airport, because, well, we've got transient pilots and they're not from around here. It's VFR flight rules. Visual. Supposed to be looking out the window. Supposed to be talking on the radio. Number 4, no parachute operation shall be permitted at night, as defined by FAR Part 1.1 definitions. That's from civil twilight to civil twilight. And again, the question is begged, is this policy for everybody, or is it just skydiving? In other words, is the FBO not allowed to conduct student operations at night? Is KU allowed to fly their jet out at night? Can you come and fly your airplane at night? But we're the only ones that can. I'll also point you to FAR 105.19 that stipulates parachute operation between sunset and sunrise. A, no person may conduct a parachute operation, and no pilot in command of an aircraft may allow a person to conduct a parachute operation from an aircraft between sunset and sunrise unless they are carrying a light that's visible for 3 statute miles. The light required by paragraph A of this section must be displayed from the time that the person or object is under a properly functioning parachute and until that person reaches the surface. So it tells you right there in 105.19 that as far as the FAA is concerned, as long as I make the proper radio communication with the FAA and I wear a light that's visible for 3 statute miles, once my parachute deploys and I turn it on and keep it on until I land on the ground, I'm perfectly legal to make skydives at night. So I'm curious why you would try to set a policy that wants to supersede the FAA. Number 5, all parachute operations must be conducted within a 2 nautical mile radius centered on the geographic center of the airport's designated drop zone. Again, this begs the question when you look at FAR, because again, I'll refer you back to all parachute operators. Number 1, you're telling me I'm supposed to comply with all these regulations, the very ones that I just cited that you're trying to supersede. So I'll point you over to FAR 119.1, where it says accessibility, excuse me. Number 6, nonstop flights conducted within 25 statute mile radius of the airport of takeoff, carrying persons or objects for the purpose of conducting intentional parachute operations. So what that is the exemption for my commercial pilots to operate under Part 91 and have jumpers on the seat. And I can operate within 25 miles of my airport of departure. If I want to go jump in over to Ham's Quarry, perfectly legal. If I want to go jump into my kid's school and bring the football to the football game, it's perfectly legal. So why would you set policy that tries to supersede what the FAA says I can do? They say I can operate within 25 nautical miles. That's a function of FAA, not a function of the airport board. And I ought to be allowed to do, under the airport policies, what the FAA dictates that I should be allowed to do. Number 6, the operator will only conduct parachute operations to the drop zone that is designated by the City of Lawrence, and no parachutist shall be permitted to land on any aircraft movement surfaces on the airport. Again, I'm going to point you to page 5 of Advisory Circular 105.2E. Number 2, subsection, parachutes landing on airports, and it stipulates, I quote, airports may designate suitable parachute landing areas, and while skydivers attempt to land in such areas, at times there may be inadvertent landings in other grass or hard surface areas. This could include landing on runways, taxiways, and other hard surface areas. As such, runways, taxiways, clearways, and obstacle-free zones are not prohibited areas. So why are we trying to set policy that is contradictory to what the feds say? Number 7, drop zones may be modified for purposes of airport expansion or other projects at the discretion of the City of Lawrence. I don't really have much to say on that, but it doesn't surprise me it's in there. Operator, number 8, operator shall permit or shall not permit parachutists to cross any aircraft movement area of the airport unless they're properly escorted. Anybody else supposed to be properly escorted? What designates a proper escort? Okay? And I'll refer you back to what we just talked about with parachutes landing on other areas of the airport. Perfectly says that these other areas are not prohibited areas and should be vacated as soon as practical. So therefore, the FAA has deemed that skydivers are smart enough to cross an active runway or a taxiway or walk across an apron. The same as his students can walk out there and pre-flight an airplane and they're not escorted. Or a lot of times I see people get off their jets out there for football games and they're not escorted and they walk all over the tarmac out there. Okay? I'd also refer you to one of the cases, which was Skydive Paris, Tennessee versus Henry County. And if you'll pull up that director's decision, it's on
What was
page
the name?
18.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, sir.
Would you state the name of that case again, for me, please?
Skydive Paris, Tennessee versus Henry County.
Thank you.
On page 18 in the director's determination, it says specifically, from the FSDO that conducted this review. Of specific relation to this case, the Flight Standards Service provided that, quote, while we would not presume to call skydivers aircraft, there exists a long-standing precedent for affording skydivers the same operational latitude given to an aircraft while in flight or while taxiing. There's also worth noting that the OFAs, or OFZs now, speak to stationary objects that will remain in a fixed position, such as a parked aircraft, for some indeterminate period of time. This is not the case with skydivers who will land and quickly vacate an RSA, OFA, or any other type of area such as a taxiway or runway. So right there, the FAA thinks we're smart enough to be able to cross a runway or a taxiway or some other area on an airport property. Many of us have been doing it for years, the same as anybody that's a pilot. Let's see here. Number 5, parachute operations, well, we already covered that one. Number 6, the operator will only conduct parachute operations to the drop zone that is designated to the city of Lawrence. No parachutist, we covered that. Sorry, excuse me. We're on number 9. Number 9, no automobiles or vehicles except authorized emergency maintenance vehicles shall be permitted inside the fence perimeter. Nobody else is allowed to drive in there either. I mean, there's certain incidents where you guys sit here and you talk about, we want you guys to operate safe, and there could be a need for someone to get in a vehicle and drive to an injured skydiver or some other type of emergency event on that property. I see people come out there all the time in their Learjets, and they drive their rental cars out there and they unload all their stuff. I know each and almost everyone behind me that has their hangar out there drives their hangar. So that's okay for all those folks to do that, but skydiving operator, nah, not you guys. Okay, we're starting to get back into exclusive rights. Number 10, operator shall ensure all parachutists are at least the age of 18. Happens to be United States Parachute Association, BSR. All skydivers will be of the age of 18. That happens to be a waiverable item. So I don't think it should be a policy set by the city when you look at the fact that, I'm sure some of you probably know, for a student pilot certificate under the FAA, 14 is all that is needed for balloons and gliders, and for 16-year-old for powered flight, that's airplane, helicopters, and gyroplanes. The minimum age for a private pilot certificate is 16 for balloons and gliders and 17 for powered flight. So why do we want to set a policy that's different than what the FAA says? Somebody should be smart enough to come and learn to fly an airplane or a sailplane. If I get a waiver from the USPA to take some dying kid for Make-A-Wish who's 16 on a tandem, or 14, there's no violation in the FAR for doing so. And since a 14 and the 16-year-old under the FAA's own guidelines can operate an aircraft solo, then it's kind of silly to require someone to be 18 years of age as a policy when there are other avenues to ensure that underage children aren't jumping. I started at age 16, but back when I started at age 16, it wasn't like it is now. And as an operator, I'm not going to take somebody who's 16 unless it's an extreme situation like I described. Some child that's maybe dying of cancer or something of that nature. Other than that, 18 years old. It's to limit our liability. Number 11, all parachutists shall be required to sign a release of liability acceptable to the city, and so forth. That's a standard operating condition. Having a waiver is not an issue. In fact, I've submitted a couple copies of a waiver for Tony Wheeler to review and sign off on. The problem we run into, as if by design, is when we get into this next section that a copy of all such release forms should be for each parachutist provided to the city of Lawrence prior to permitting any operations to occur. And that's very common for skydiving to take place on the weekend when those offices are closed. Chuck's the default airport manager. He's not out there on the weekends. He doesn't have an office out there. And it's very common to have, for example, since I hear all this talk about the jets won't come anymore, which I know not to be true based on my experience of hanging out at Clinton Regional Airport in Clinton, Missouri. And our hangar was right next to the fuel pumps. While we were getting ready to get on our Cessna 206 to go up and jump with a load of jumpers, up rolls a jet and parts. Kid Rock got out. It was that close to getting talked into going, okay, until he found out he couldn't be first in line. So it's not uncommon for people to show up. Oh, you guys do that here? Can I do that? Sure. Here, you have to fill out the waiver and you have to watch this safety training video. You have to jump through some hoops. So in that event, somebody walks in, says they want to make a jump. How am I supposed to get my waiver to him on Saturday at 2 o'clock? Or Saturday at 6:30 for a sunset jump? Is anybody else in business on that airport, or anybody that comes in, like the crop dusters or any of those other people, required to provide such contractual documentation to the city prior to operating? Are his students required to have their stuff submitted to before they go fly his airplanes? I don't think so. Number 12, the operator shall be responsible for the issuance of appropriate NOTAMs involving airspace above the airport that may be needed for parachute operations. That's standard, that's FAA function, we're required to do it. If we don't do it, we get in trouble from the FAA. It's pretty simple, pretty clear cut. So I don't know why it needs to be a policy when, you know, everybody wants to come up here and paint us out like some kind of unsafe outlaws and we don't follow the rules. That's not the case. Never has been the case. In fact, in my 34-year career, I have absolutely 0 FAA violations on my record. Where we run into the problem is the sentence in here about we'll notify the airport manager when any such NOTAMs have been issued. Who else has that requirement out there? Any of you file a NOTAM, you're going to have to call him and provide him notice? I think the answer to that is no. Nobody else but the skydivers are. It's FAA requirement. I don't understand why you want to have policy in here that says I need to call him when he's not even there. Okay? If I don't have a NOTAM, I get in trouble from the feds. And the last thing I want is any problems with the feds. I have a great relationship with the FAA. Number 13. Operators shall immediately notify the City of Lawrence of any incident or accident arising out of its parachute operation that involves a personal injury to any individual, or property damage to any property regardless of whether such injury or damage occurs on or off the airport premises. All that sounds pretty good, except for one part. If somebody gets hurt on the airport property or some property gets damaged, I have no problem. You know, that's embarrassment. You don't want something like that to happen. But if somebody goes out and lands on Richard's car and puts a dent in the hood, now I got to go talk to Richard about why there's a dent in his hood. And there's insurance to cover that for licensed skydivers. Okay? There may be a need to call the police and get a police report for insurance and other things. Okay? But where we run into the problem is talking about stuff that happens off the property. And comes back to, does Mr. Hetrick have to have his students, is he required to have a requirement like that to operate his flight school? So he goes down there and they crash an airplane in Ottawa. Is he required to notify the city, oh, by the way, I crashed an airplane in Ottawa and my student got hurt? He's not. This is a discriminatory type of language that you need to look at because you're headed down the exclusive rights path when you want to single out one person from another. And if you'll read the exclusive rights on page 1 of that advisory circle, it spells it out pretty clearly what an exclusive right is. I mean, KU flies people around on their jet and their King Air. Some doctor slips and falls off the steps out there in Salina getting off the airplane. Is he required to call the city? And by the way, such and so professor slipped on an airplane and got hurt on tarmac in Salina. They're not. Number 14. This is the one about the briefing. Normally, I wouldn't have a problem communicating with anybody what we plan to do for the day. But again, it becomes a little bit offensive to suggest that we have to have a policy. And I'm assuming I'm the only one, right? Because I'm pretty sure that nobody else on that airport has to have a daily conference with this guy's operation and that guy's operation. In fact, is he supposed to go over there and have the same conference with them every day? I don't think so. I seriously doubt that he does. Now, all of a sudden, it's my responsibility when it's supposed to be a VFR operation, visual flight rules. And I understand where he's coming from, where he wants to come up here and convince you I'm the boogeyman, that he can't start that helicopter and take off. That's not factual. He could certainly start that helicopter, and he could certainly use visual flight rules to depart that helicopter. There's nothing in the FAR to prevent him from doing that. That's their prerogative to do that from a safety standpoint. He likes to claim the insurance card. But I know plenty of operations throughout this country. In fact, I've flown right next to him in my parachute while that helicopter was departing. It's VFR. We operate under VFR. We don't miss our targets near as much as some people would suggest. And when people communicate, it's not that big of an encroachment upon each other. So I don't have a problem communicating, but the thing that comes back to, we're headed down that exclusive rights territory. No one else is required on the airport to follow that policy. Number 15, this is the one about the helicopter having priority over everyone else. In fact, that's pretty common at any skydiving operation that's on an airfield with a helicopter. And nobody really has a problem to do that. But when we start setting up policies to say, hey, only you guys. In fact, I've stood out there and watched while his helicopter and timed it took off while his students were flying laps around the pattern. I didn't see anybody call that airplane over there and tell him, hey, quit flying around the pattern, the helicopter's trying to take off. It's not what happened. They just kept out shooting touch and goes, going around the patch. Didn't hinder his operation one bit. We're pretty much the same thing. The only difference is I don't have a power plant to power up and do a go-around. And in fact, we're a glider, and it has to be flown like a glider. And then if we want to talk about rights of way, you know, clearly if I'm descending under my parachute and he's got a helicopter there with a bunch of meat grinders flapping around in the breeze, you think I want to get anywhere near it? No. You think I want to land on a runway? No. You think I want to land on a taxiway? No. But if it came down to that's the last chance or last resort, then I'm going to take it. It's visual flight rules. It's right away. Okay? Your Learjet has to yield to the hot air balloon. It's in the FARs. That's all pretty self-explanatory. Still applies to this type, kind, and class aeronautical activity. Number 16, operators shall be responsible to ensure all pilots engaged in aircraft operations and support parachute operations shall at all times maintain proper radio communications as required by FAR 105.13. Why do we need a city policy to talk about an FAA operation? Okay, because clearly it spells it out in 105 that that's what he's supposed to be doing. And since I have a great working relationship with the FAA, and I'd like to keep having a good working relationship with the FAA, of course my pilots are going to communicate on radio. Just like they're going to monitor Unicom, so when his helicopter has to leave, we can hear it. But I don't need some special person in the office costing me money to sit there and monitor and wait for their radio call that they're going to depart, then get on the phone and coordinate. It's a VFR. Hey, the helicopter's dispatching, go around the block. Oh, they've already left. That point is VFR. They've already left. Most of anything I proposed was tandem skydiving. So you're going to have an experienced, licensed professional taking people strapped to the front of them. Most tandem people like myself have a pro rating. That's the qualification that lets me land on the football field. Okay, there's only about 6,000 people in the United States that have that qualification. Okay, it's earned, it's not given. We get down to number 17, operators shall establish appropriate emergency procedures and communicate this procedure to all participants prior to commencing each day's parachute operations. Okay, What participants? We're talking about just the people jumping out of the plane, or am I supposed to also call his operation too? Since now there's a policy that says I'm supposed to call them and have a daily briefing with them. And what kind of emergencies are we planning for? Talking about aircraft emergencies, a flood, tornado drills, what? Part of aircraft emergencies and what to do in the event of an aircraft emergency is covered in the first jump course. It's even covered in the tandem briefing when somebody comes to do a tandem. Okay? Because if something goes wrong on an airplane, we got two choices. One, you're going to ride it in, or number two, you're getting out. And we listen to the pilot in command. If he says don't get out, we don't get out. Number 18, any events or special parachuting activities must obtain a permit from the city of Lawrence not less than 60 calendar days prior to the event. Event insurance will be required at the sole cost and expense of the operator. So my question is, what kind of event would kick that off? What other events and or users are required to get a special use permit? Okay, when a Make-A-Wish comes out there and does their little charity thing, they got to get a permit? Because if they don't, why am I being singled out? Now we're headed down exclusive rights again. Because you're saying these guys can have a special event, they don't need a special permit, but you guys jump through some more hoops to get a special use permit. Okay? It's discriminatory. It's exactly why grant assurances are the way that they are. It's a level playing field. The insurance. What kind of insurance are we talking about? You want me to get insurance for the act of somebody jumping out of an airplane? It's not going to happen. You want me to get slip and fall policy to cover that entire airport property where people are going to land in parachutes? Ain't going to happen. It's not available. Therefore, it's unobtainable. You can't write a minimum standard if you'll go through your minimum standards. You cannot write minimum standards that are discriminatory economically by requirements of an insurance policy that's not obtainable. Typical slip and fall insurance policy for skydiving operation consists of the parking lot and the office. And once any parachute activities begin, that person's not covered for general liability. You cannot get a liability policy for the act of jumping out of an airplane. I'm sure a couple of these guys are going to come up here and try to tell you that's not true. I've seen it listed, you guys spoke with Falcon Insurance. I've spoken to Falcon Insurance plenty of times myself, so I'm well versed in what kind of insurance is available. Number 19, operator will develop and maintain a log of parachute operations. This log shall contain at a minimum each flight conducted for parachute operations and the name of each parachutist on each flight. A copy of this log will be given to the airport manager at first each month and will be available for inspection by the airport manager at any time. My question comes back to, is the flight school or KU or Life Flight or anybody else required to keep such a logbook? And if so, are they required to submit that on the first of the month to the airport manager and have it on site for manager inspection at any time? So I go out there right now and I ask him to produce his logbook for all his student flights. He's going to produce one? Has he got a bunch of them in his office submitted from the first of the month? I doubt it. If they do, fine. I'm going to run a manifest anyway. Because that's how we do things. We have a manifest. I track my load. I track who's flying it. I track who's on that airplane. That way when people unfortunately have things happen to them, I know who disappeared it. But some of these things, gentlemen and ma'am, seem by design to be cumbersome and deliberate. And I know some people on the board want to look at me and tell y'all who've never met me how adversarial I am. And I wouldn't come up here and be adversarial if people didn't, in charge, stand up and say things to me like, well, I called the Airspace and Operations Division and they don't have any usable airspace in Douglas County, Mr. McCauley, and you should move your operation to Gardner. And that's a quote, right, Richard? So when people get up and they sling that kind of garbage, and not know that I have a whole stack full of documents from the FAA.
Do you have any more comments other than slandering or accusing members of this committee? Do you have any more comments, Mr. McCall?
That was a factual statement, sir. And there's been plenty of slandering of my name in your documents and up here today at this podium.
What have I said to you that has been slanderous?
I didn't say it, you said it.
Well, you use the pronoun you, and I took that to mean me.
Used, there has been plenty of slandering used up here at this podium about me. And by members of your board in the documentation, okay? It's listed on the website. For example, a statement saying that they asked for the safety study, never got it. It's the memorandum, Nicolette Oliver. So there's plenty of things in there, okay?
Can you ask, I want to go back to one point. with
Yes,
you.
sir.
Liability is a concern to the city.
Yes, sir.
It's a concern of mine because I'm a cranky lawyer who deals with liability.
Yes, sir.
If we insist on having some kind of release of liability,
That's what the waiver is, sir.
yeah, with the waiver,
Correct.
and that it be delivered to the city prior to any jump operation,
Mm-hmm.
would you be supportive of a recommendation that we require that the city have a city manager, operator at the airport to receive those documents?
I have suggested to your city commission for a very long time that you should have an actual airport manager that's at that airport full-time.
24/7.
No, but at least, most of them, it's usually Wednesday through Sunday, because a lot of stuff happens on the weekends, okay? But every place varies. Some places have them 7 days a week.
So the
My point is, during business hours, the airport should have a manager on that airport.
So the answer to my question
yes.
is yes. Thank you, sir.
That's it. I have no more comments related to your draft.
Thank you.
Wes, appreciate you taking the time to come up here.
Yes, sir.
Any more public comments? All right. We thank everybody that came in. We do appreciate it. And this is the type of feedback that we're really hoping to get tonight so that we could move this forward and get the commission what they asked for. So. So, our next action is, what are we gonna do with the information we just received? As I said, our next action is to decide what we want. Hey, before everybody leaves, there's one other thing I wanted to say is, we are gonna take public comment. If people are watching this on YouTube or whatever, or wherever they happen to be watching it, if you have comments for the next week, if you want to forward them to Chuck Souls through his city email address, he'll make sure that those comments get forwarded to the subcommittee for consideration, and we'll go from there. So, appreciate it. Okay, so what do we want to do with the information we just received? Do we want to get it back together with the subcommittee to go over what we've learned, and if there are any modifications to the procedures, bring them forward? Do we want to accept the procedures as they are?
At this point, because there was so many things brought up and they're pretty technical and legal, I think we should have our legal staff review it
Okay.
through the city. And if appropriate with the board, that the subcommittee would take some of those other items and maybe, I mean, we've got it all on tape, so we can review them and come back to the board with any suggestions.
I would probably just repeat my recommendation to the city commission back in January, is that there is a two-prong, we need to have a two-prong response to this information that we gathered here, and that is that it goes back to the committee, and that city staff has the chance to view it with legal.
Yeah, I would.
I think to do otherwise would be nuts.
Yeah, I think we perhaps should just have another, somewhat of an reiteration of what we did earlier when we prepared this, which was that we will take all this input, we'll filter it, we'll discuss it, we'll get input from the city as well, and then we'll make that all into a set of, whatever changes we feel should be made, and then we'll resubmit it for approval.
I also think we need to wait for the FAA.
I think
We're
the
gonna be
direction,
wasting our time if the FAA comes back and has a number of modifications, and we've already made modifications, so I think we need to wait on that.
Can I say something on that note?
Hey, stand up to the podium by the microphone.
There seems to be a bit of a misunderstanding from the very get-go, going back to 2009, about a whole bunch of these issues. And one of the issues that I keep having a problem with, that we don't communicate well on, is there seems to be a bunch of people, and I'm not pointing fingers, and I'm not trying to say y'all bad, because a lot of people in aviation don't understand this. But a lot of people just don't understand how certain parts of the FAA work, okay? And when you submit your minimum standards to the feds, the airport compliance lady, Lynn Martin's her name, she's in the ADO office in Kansas City, you can find her name, it's listed, you can call her and talk to her, each one of you personally. The FAA does not approve nor disapprove. And those key language, they don't approve or disapprove your minimum standards. They'll let you put whatever discriminatory and exclusive right language in there you want. And then when someone like me comes along and forces the issue, that's when they're going to make you get compliant. And so that's what's going on. That's why she's not going to call him up and tell him, oh, by the way, these drafts are good to go. And the reason she's not going to tell you that is for some of the things that I just quoted to you all. Because you have language in there that is discriminatory by its nature in itself. For example, trying to tell me I can't conduct a night operation.
Well, we appreciate that.
That's where this misunderstanding is.
Thank you, Wes. My feeling on it is, we run the comments by legal, as far as what things have been said. We can get some feedback from the legal department, and then give those comments back to the subcommittee for consideration and draft.
and then I think, because the city commission has asked for the board to do this, and then it will be their decision as to whether or not to wait for. And I know we may have to do it again, we may have to change.
Has the FAA commented on how long it's gonna take them to take a look at them?
I have not received any comment back.
I personally spoke to her on the phone,
I've talked to her too.
and she told me she's not going to comment on it.
Well, maybe she should tell that to the city.
So, don't think
Well,
I
there-
can ask her.
There's another issue that we really haven't received direction from the FAA on, as far as I know. And that is, what is it that they are suggesting as far as parachute activities are concerned? I don't know. I mean, we haven't really received anything in writing that I know of from the FAA that compels us to allow this activity if we find it to be incompatible with safety.
In fact, you had two safety studies.
So, am I incorrect that, I mean, have we received anything in writing from the FAA that says that
We
we
got the
must?
one copy of the letter that was forwarded to us, it was prepared by that Mike Millard, that said there's areas that could accommodate on the airport property. That's what it said.
Well, I'm not talking about a landing zone, I'm talking about,
No, that's the only
That's all that we've received.
that we've gotten, right, Chuck?
Mhm.
right,
And the commission has asked us to develop these guidelines for that,
all right.
for those drop zones.
in any event. I think, that what we discussed is fine. We'll take all of the comments we receive, we'll reconvene, we'll kick things around, we'll ponder them, and we will come up with whatever changes we think we need to make.
The question I have is, the chicken and the egg, should the subcommittee digest this and put it in a form for the legal department to analyze? Or do you want the legal department to listen to it and then come back to us? Because it seems to me that with the aviation and technical side, it would be better for the subcommittee to put it in a digestible form, to give it to the legal department for review.
We'll figure that out.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, do we need a motion as to what we're going to do with the public comment here? I think we do, but I'll defer to your guidance.
I would think so, and then it would also be good, maybe if we determined that we would try and have this back before the end of the year
Okay.
to the board.
I will move that the board direct the subcommittee to take the public comment from today's hearing and review that and report back to us no later than December 31, 2018. Simultaneously.
2017 or 18?
2017, sorry. I was doing planning. And also simultaneously recommend that the city legal department take a look at the commentary this evening and prepare whatever recommendations they think are appropriate.
I second.
Moved and seconded. Any other? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. All right. So, let's get back to our normal agenda. All right. Let's start with the review of the July 12th minutes as been amended.
I had two things I wanted to have brief discussion on. One was in paragraph 4, and actually the third paragraph in that section, it lists the automatic gates were bid at $44,000. Is that per gate or the total of the two gates?
It was per gate.
That is outrageous.
Thought so too.
They're really nice gates.
So I need to
We-
insert per gate in there?
I think I would.
Okay.
And then in paragraph 6 on apron replacement, I think that last word needs an F on the front of it.
Yes. Instead of a D.
Okay, instead of a D. Funding, funding.
That's funding.
Yep.
Any other corrections? So,
With those two corrections, I would move that the minutes of the July 12th meeting be approved.
Second.
seconded by Jeff. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we'll go to the approval of the June 8th minutes. Any modifications to those? I think we actually reviewed those and pushed it to next time to make the amendments.
Yeah,
So-
I think I move that we approve the minutes from 8 June as written.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. Update on the wildlife fence.
So, Rick Bryant's here with ADG, but the update that I have is that next Friday, Rick, is when we're having our pre-con? Did I?
Close.
It's too many dates. Okay, I'll just let Rick proceed.
Okay.
It's done, isn't it, Rick?
Rick Bryant, Airport Development Group, your friendly consultant. Mr. Long, the price on that gate will come down a little bit, thanks to a pre-construction meeting that was held Friday with the fence contractor and a slight adjustment. Part of that is for the boring underneath the asphalt from the end of the hangar, which will connect the power to the gate, and a slight adjustment in the location of where the power line is going to be run to avoid some other city utilities along the sidewalk there on Bryant Way. And so, can't tell you right now how much that's going to be, but it will be less. So there'll be
Okay,
some cost
so-
savings there.
I guess my concern is that amount, is that the amount that the city's expecting from the west side tenants?
No.
No,
Okay, that's the number I need.
no, I provided those numbers to Chuck a few weeks ago.
Okay.
As part of the discussions with the west side tenant, what the city will pay for the manual gate as part of the FAA grant, and then there was the
Right.
$12,000 over and above that for the automation parts to position that and make it work similar to what will be on Bryant Way.
Okay. And then the city will cover those other modifications that have to be done.
Yeah.
Power the gate, et cetera. Okay.
Yeah, that's not a problem.
So
Yeah,
is-
we still need to talk about that, but
Yeah, okay.
So is the number that you're looking for 12,000? Is that,
I don't know that that's.
The,
sufficient.
or is that number still out there in the?
I don't have the bid numbers in front of me, but it's a manual gate that is slated to go over on the west side of the airfield. And I believe that is somewhere in the range of $10,000 to $12,000, which is a 90-10 split. So the FAA is picking up 90% of that. The city will pick up the other 10, and then to automate that was estimated parts and whatnot, $12,000, which can be added at a later time.
Okay. That's closer to what I was expecting.
Yeah, so we're still,
We can have that sidebar conversation
yes.
later time. Thank you.
The good news is we finally have got to the point where all the contracts have been signed, the performance bonds have been issued. We are moving forward. We had Amerifence Corporation out of Lenexa is going to be the contractor on this project. The great news is they have a long history of working on airports, so they're very familiar with the safety operations that are required. Also have a lot of experience. They also are going to send one of their project managers out to Hayes Regional, because this fence will be the second one in the state of Kansas of its design, and Hayes is a few months ahead of us. So they're gonna go out and spend the day with the contractor out there and hopefully pick up some tidbits that will make them work smarter and more efficiently, because they have a 100 working day contract. So we had a pre-con on Friday, which representatives from the city were there. We toured the airfield, talked about some issues that they had, got questions in preparation for the Thursday, October 12th, pre-construction meeting, which will be at 1:15 out at the airport. Those people that have been invited to that are primarily Airport Development Group, which is the engineering firm that designed it, Amerifence, the contractor, Land Plan Engineering, which did all the survey work, representatives of the city, Hetrick Air Services as the FBO, and then there is a long list of stakeholders that have assets out at the airport that are not necessarily aeronautical related. Mostly those are underground utility providers that are a little nervous, making sure that their asset is not damaged in any way, shape, or form, or cause a cataclysmic explosion of a natural gas transmission pipeline. So we have all that moving forward. And other than that, we anticipate, based on our discussion last Friday, Amerifence has materials on order. They will start to arrive and will be stored on the west side of the field over by the pile of shavings that have been milled out. We're going to go on top of the fence on the ground for grass prevention, and then on the concrete abandoned taxiway so that they can stage them in different parts for different areas of the airfield. The initial plan is starting October 23rd, and then the 100 days will begin, and hopefully we'll have great weather. And they want to start by the T hangars and then move east on Bryant Way, move over to Airport Road, jump the road, and then work their way down around the south and get through the Oxbow while the Oxbow is somewhat dry, and then hit the eastern leg of the airport property, and then save the west side of the airport for last. There has been some adjustments based on discussion with the tenants of the fence alignment. The only issue yet to be unresolved is whether it's manual or automated on the west side. At this moment, our direction is we're moving forward with a manual gate installation between the KU hangar and Mr. Craig's hangar. And then at some point, if all parties agree and wish to, then they can automate that at their pleasure and timetable.
Could that be the last thing that's done?
That area is right now the last area to be
Okay.
worked on.
So that gives us some time to resolve it, maybe?
Yeah, it does give you some time to develop a game plan and cost sharing. It also might be advisable to just wait and let the manual gate be installed and let us work with the FAA on final inspection of the entire project, and then immediately right after that, you can put in the parts to automate it,
Right.
and that won't cause any problem with anybody.
All right, let's meet on it.
Who's gonna oversee the project?
What?
I was just keeping in mind when we had the runway overlay and we had some conflicts and things. Is there one person that's in charge of overseeing the project as it progresses?
Yes, there is.
You're gonna be out there.
Yes.
Good to hear we have
It'll
somebody that will
be
be there.
long days out there.
Okay.
Fortunately, they are anticipating about an 8-person work crew, which is actually smaller than what I forecasted. And their duty day is approximately 7:30 in the morning till 4:30, depending upon the objectives they want to accomplish that day. So.
And we really don't anticipate much as far as runway closures or anything like that while they're working.
Great question. What would be termed aviation-sensitive operational areas will be the runway ends of 119, because they will be close to the runway protection zone and object-free area zone. There will be NOTAMs issued for those areas on that timeline that they're going to work. They won't be in an aeronautical operations area, but they'll be on the fringe, so there'll be NOTAMs posted, which will work with the city, which they'll get into that on their agenda, that they're gonna learn how to do NOTAMs. And so we'll just let the aviation public know that there'll be contractors working in that area. They'll have their flags on their truck, they'll have their flashing lights. They are going to invest in handheld radios so they can monitor the Unicom. The rest of it, they'll be well outside the safety areas and have minimal impact. We will, at the pre-con meeting, we will once again review all those steps and discuss the haul routes and access to the airport from multiple locations around the field, so there won't be any driving across runways, taxiways, the grass. They'll be well outside the perimeter of the airport.
Super.
This is just ringing in my head because Mr. Rentz is in the crowd. He raised the issue as to the gate on the west side and being able to turn an 18-wheeler in that area. Was that ever addressed, and was the gate moved, and are you a happy camper?
Yes, it was. We looked at that. We had a delivery with a long 18-wheeler out there, and I purposely made him drive the route where we're proposing to put the gate, and so that's gonna work okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
We even measured that day
Yeah.
2 or 3 times. Okay. Before we even tried to cut anything.
The only question I've got on that, are there gonna be any times when they're doing fences or gates that I'm concerned about the west side, but I'm sure Lloyd's concerned about the east side, where there will be access restrictions to get to hangars and stuff during that time? And the only, I mean, that could happen, I understand, because construction, just if we can get a little bit of notice in that so we can let people know, that
Well,
would
there'll
be a
be,
good thing.
sure,
Yeah.
there's constant communication with that. The way things are moving, if they go on their present path, like I stated earlier, they will go east on Bryant Way and then cut down around south. The gate, the automated gate will be one of the last things to be attached on that street. So there'll be constant access. So,
And we can work around that.
oh,
Even if there's gotta be some, we'll figure something out to make.
oh,
it work.
the impact will be minimal. So, yes.
Thank you.
It's shaping up to be a great project finally. You know, thanks to the board for putting the elbow grease in with the FAA to get this money for this fiscal year, because who knows what's going to happen next year. So we got everything moving in the right direction, and this will be a great project for the airport. So, any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rick. Okay, automated notems.
Well, I wanted to give the board a quick update on the KDOT Airport Improvement Program. So those applications I received notice are out and available. However, the city has 2 outstanding ones that we need to complete. So I wasn't going to submit one this year. They do keep our old ones on file, which is how we got Taxiway C. We submitted that in 14 and got it just last year. And then we also got the apron there in front of the KU hangar. So both of those projects will be done next summer. We had to use all the airport capital improvement program funds for this gate match, so, or for this fence match. So that's where we're at.
Did the city include in their budget the 10% that would be required to complete both those projects
Yes.
next summer?
Yes.
Excellent.
Chuck, Jeff and I attended the Four States Conference, and thank you. One of the things that we picked up in and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, one of the things that we picked up in the meeting of all of the Kansan folks was that there is an organization, the Kansas Association of Airport Managers, or Kansas
Airports.
Airports.
Yeah.
And are we a member?
I get all that information. I don't know that we pay any due. Are we?
We are a member.
Rick is a member. And we've actually hosted
Yeah, we hosted one.
one of their
2 years
their
ago.
annual
Yeah.
events here, which included golf outings.
But I don't
and things like
think, I don't think we saw Lawrence Municipal listed as being a member. Because I think I saw a list.
Well, you were doing better spying than I was.
So you think we are?
Yes, you should be.
Okay.
It could be a question of being omitted from the list from not paying dues.
All right.
And I'd be happy, I served 4 years as a board member, so I'd be happy to make an inquiry
Okay.
with the treasurer to see if you're in good standing or if it's just simply you haven't got your dues paid. They're $100 a year.
And the reason I'm raising this is that I had a sense that active members of that association had a closer relationship with KDOT Aviation than others who were just sitting there sort of, huh, what? And,
The city of Lawrence has an excellent,
Um,
Communication with.
not
the-
communication, but relationship
okay,
with KDOT on all levels. So that's not an issue.
Can I chime in on that also?
yeah.
The relationship between KDOT and KAA is a pretty tight one, as is the FAA, and they try to support KAA. Like most volunteer organizations, KAA is only as good as leadership. And one of the things that the organization struggles with is regular participation from the 124 public use airports in the state. Many of the smaller communities have an individual that wears multiple hats and is not a singular airport manager. So at the annual convention, which was in Manhattan this summer, I was out of state, so I didn't get to attend, but the participation was about the usual number of suspects from airports, usually the large commercial service and the large regional airports. It is good to participate, to send somebody from the board to represent the city and the airport, if nothing else, just for networking. But I'll chime in with Chuck. The relationship between the city of Lawrence and KDOT Aviation is pretty strong. And it's one that needs to continue to be nurtured. Sadly, KDOT Aviation has gone through a pretty extensive rotation of personnel in the last 2 to 3 years. So when that happens, part of it is political appointments, others are just moving on to other jobs and tired of state service. So it is in the best interest of the board and the city to maintain that relationship and go over, say hi once in a while, or at the four-state conference when they have the Kansas breakout session. You know, that's a good time to go up, say hi. And yesterday I was in McPherson, another one of our clients, and there was a young man from K-State Salina that is working part-time for KDOT Aviation. And so when Chuck mentions the grants, which September 30th was the deadline, the demand for grants, so here's the seed I'm planting with this group. We have 2 in the hopper right now that we need to process and get taken care of in 2018, but the demand continues to grow exponentially. They had, for $5 million this past budget period, they had in excess of $30 million of wish lists from around the state. And so, based on, and I'll try to get off my soapbox here pretty quickly, based on what Congress does at the federal level with the FAA and future funding, then additional pressure trickles down to the state level to meet all the wants and needs, because there's, you know, as we all know, a huge unfunded mandate, you know, to keep airports compliant. So maintaining that relationship, and I have to say that a lot of the KAA members still talk about the annual meeting that was held in Lawrence there a few years ago, about what a great time that they had, and they still rave about the Free State food and drink that we had at the Carnegie Building, and they wonder, when are you going to do it again? So, another seed to plant. If you want to maintain that relationship, be active with the group and have them all come back to Lawrence. They had a great time. So,
So are you gonna check to see if need to pay dues, or?
in the morning, I will send her an email and ask if you're a member in good standing or if you just haven't paid your bill.
And is this something we can look up? Does it list our facility and what's available, and is that kind of an advantage? So
The website is, I believe, kaa.org, or if you just type in Kansas Association of Airports, the website will come up. I'm not sure, again, it goes back to volunteer participation. I'm not sure how current it is. I haven't looked at it for a while. About 3 years ago, they overhauled it, and then,
I never heard of it.
you know, I don't know what's on it.
until here.
Every airport is invited to participate and be a member of the organization. You know, we used to be a member, so I'll check, and then I'll let Chuck and Richard know via email what I find out tomorrow. And
Thank you.
then you guys can have fun with it. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Automated NOTAMs. I got to sit in on that one.
That was something you wanted on the agenda. You were
Yeah.
gonna speak to.
Well, I was just gonna address that for FYI, that I got one right here. You know, space stereo. Basically, the FAA came out with a program to enter NOTAMs online. So you have to have a password and be trained to use the program. So Lloyd and I sat in with the city staff and went through their training, and it is phenomenal. They can do that. Lloyd sets NOTAMs quite often for like when there's ball games to notify pilots of the TFRs in the area and which runways you can use, which runways you can't, which direction you can fly to help keep pilots out of trouble if they actually check with flight services. And so, but then going online to NOTAM, you can still do the phone-in NOTAMs and do it online, or do it over the phone, but the online allows more control. The city can have access to it, so they can do it a lot more frequently, especially when we get into inclement weather. There's all sorts of runway conditions and runway taxiways, apron, that if we just plow half the apron, so half of it's snow-packed and wind-blown, you can program into it, east half is clear, west half is snow-packed, and how deep it is. If there's windrows on taxiways, you know, it gives a lot of freedom of getting those NOTAMs out, especially when the weather turns nasty. If they're ice-covered, it gives the city a way of quickly getting it out there, and they can just get to a laptop or a computer and enter that. So it's really a pretty neat system the FAA's come up with, pretty user-friendly.
Who's authorized to get online and do that?
I know Lloyd is, Lauren Stone is, Jason, and is there anybody else with the city? Are you?
Janice would be,
Okay, Janice is on there.
And so you can do that from home or an iPad in your truck or,
not the iPad yet, they said not friendly for that,
okay,
laptop or desktop, yeah.
okay.
And I just want to say that, you know, I generally expect that I'm going to get in early September, you know, 4 or 5 phone calls from pilots who have gotten the friendly letter from their FAA saying that they landed during a TFR, and you're doing a much better job. I've only got one client this football season.
You know, we actually have signs out there as well. That
I know.
The board came up with
Pretty big
signs that say
yeah.
TFR today to warn pilots that are driving into the airport before they depart that they might want to check the NOTAMs with the TFRs out there. So that's what the automated NOTAM. We are running later than usual tonight, but it is something we need to really start working on the open house. We might want to include some of the past board members to help us plan that. It'll be our 90th anniversary next year. And the reason it's important to get started right now is if we want any military participation, military displays or military aircraft there, they usually want stuff a year in advance, so we really need to get on the ball. We're starting to fall behind that one.
Are you thinking next spring or next fall?
I'm thinking next fall,
Okay.
like September, once KU releases their football schedule, to make sure it's a weekend that they're free. And am I mistaken, but isn't September, right in that area, the Public Works Month as well, or
Ours is in May.
in May?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it wouldn't be cooperating with that, but it would be something to start working on and get that. The aviation camp, you know, we did lose one of our pilots that was very active this year, and she was a good asset for us to have. But we will have, the aviation camp will be the first weekend after KU graduation. And well, hopefully we'll get some better placing in the Parks and Rec spring calendar or summer calendar for that, because I think we're going to just go with straight aviation camp so that it gets more attention that way. And we've had some incredible turnout, some really incredible kids come out, and the volunteers from the Jayhawk modelers and the 99s especially, and just local pilots and people that have participated in that camp over the years. Rick Bryant's helped with teaching classes, and Nelson Kruger, and we've really, it's put together a really good event. And working with Parks and Rec, it's been.
We have a set of modules that we do with that seem to work Do any of those modules need to be freshened or?
I think that that would be a good thing, that maybe we can get a group together to sit down and just review the modules.
And who does weather? You know, we had,
We had Rick
We had
Catsby do
yeah.
the weather for a while, and I think Rick Bryant did the weather once, but yes, we haven't, since we lost our television station, now we need to work on that. And I would be willing to bet that one of the Kansas City stations, if we get on board, we might be able to get one of their weather people to come in and work with us on that. So that's something for everybody to be thinking about.
Has Johnny Rollins come over before?
Not that I've seen. Has he come over in his helicopter?
He did at the 75th anniversary open house.
Okay.
I
So
can
that
call
could be
him.
something. You know Johnny?
Yeah,
That'd be great.
he does a lot of that stuff.
Now, does he do weather or just traffic?
He does both.
Does he?
yeah,
There you go. Well, I guess if he's a pilot, he should be able to do weather, so we should be all right on either
Chase
side.
thunderstorm lines,
Yeah.
whatever.
There you go.
he's chased,
Okay.
been chased by him.
You know,
So-
Richard, I was looking at that, open house. The Kansas Air Tour was just recent, like the very end of September, or, you know, it was, the week after, Women in Aviation Day, and that Kansas Air Tour, maybe if we were one of the stops,
That would be
that,
awesome. With the
maybe we
99s, the
Yeah,
pilot
and-
organization.
maybe we could coordinate that with having our open house.
That would
for
be great, yeah.
attendance.
Why don't you look into
I
that,
will.
and maybe that can
So
help
we
us
could
set
come
the
up with a
date.
date, yeah.
We'll
It would
just need to-
Probably be really toward the end of September, first weekend in October.
Okay.
We could look at KU football days and
And that way we
and
can
then,
plan an event around it. That'd be awesome.
Like that
Okay.
idea.
All right. Chuck, do you have a sales tax renewal proposal?
Anyway, I just wanted to make sure the board had the information, so I put in your packets. There's the brochure that went with the claim, and then what I'm giving you now is the individual brochures for each of the three questions. So on November 7th, there is a sales tax renewal proposal. There's three questions on the ballot. Question one is for 0.2% for public transportation. Question number two will be a 0.3% for infrastructure and equipment. And question number three is 0.05 for affordable housing. Again, these are sales tax renewals. Currently, this sales tax is in existence. It expires in March of 18. This new renewal would take effect April 1st of 19. It expires in March 31st of 19, and the new one would take effect March 31st, April 1st of 19. Too many things to remember. As members of a city board, we appreciate your support, but you can only educate as a member of the board, anybody who has questions. You can't advocate for any of these sales taxes, so we just have to be careful about that. That's why I wanted to put this on there for you. The information contained in these brochures give everybody, I guess, explain the ballot questions very well. And if you have any questions, or if anybody has any questions, we do have a website set up. You can submit your questions. There's a lot of information on there about these three initiatives. That's really, I just wanted to make sure you guys had the information, because I know a lot of city boards and staff get asked a lot of questions. I want to make sure you have the correct information in your hands if you do get asked a question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just one question, Chuck.
Mhm.
I think I know the answer to this, but is the airport currently getting any funding out of this public transportation pot of money?
No,
Okay,
no, ours is all based on the airport revenues that we get from the rentals and the leases.
There's this catch-all phrase in the brochure about other transportation activities as, so I just wanted to make sure I was clear on that. Thank you.
All right. Do we have any other business?
I have two things.
Go ahead.
I have one thing for Chuck. There, when the city commission promulgated and passed the guidelines for city commissions and advisory boards.
I gave you a copy of the resolution.
Yeah, and the memo also from the assistant city manager was saying that they were not recommending some kind of consolidation of transportation advisory boards. But there was some suggestion that perhaps the Aviation Advisory Board could be folded into some larger Uber board that would have maybe 2 or 3 people who were aviation experts participating in questions of public transit and sidewalks and bicycles and all the
So,
other things that go
We've
in.
developed a transportation commission. We used to have a traffic safety commission and a bicycle advisory commission. Those were the 2 official city boards. But we also had ad hoc groups, Lawrence Pedestrian Coalition, Lawrence Loop, there was a bicycle group, a lot of groups. So, and everybody had basically, you know, their own priorities. And so when we went to do projects, we would have a lot of input. And so we've developed this transportation commission that combines all of those interests into one board. We have representatives from school board, from the health department, from KU, from bicycle advocates, from the Bicycle Advisory Commission, pedestrian advocates. There's 9 members officially, and there's two for this first year from the transportation, or from the Traffic Safety Commission and the Bicycle Advisory Commission, because those were official boards, and we wanted to have some consistency. So that was done. When the city commission, we had some 50-some boards out there and commissions, and so the city commission asked the staff to go ahead and do a review of that, to see if any of these boards were still active, and if there was any way that some of them could be combined. And several recommendations were made. There was some discussion that the airport board might become part of that transportation commission, and that would probably mean one, because that's all we've got from any other representation, one person from, you know, aviation sitting on that board. That has not been done. That could still be reconsidered. I would think that this board, because of the technical nature of aviation and dealing with the FAA, the Transportation Commission deals with a lot of public, you know, transit, and we still have PTAC. We didn't get rid of PTAC, but we do have somebody on from PTAC, which is our Transit Advisory Board. So we haven't gotten rid of that. Those 2 industries are just so different than, I know we lump it all into transportation, but you could lump railroads, you can lump shipping, you can, and that's, I don't, it still could be done, but that would be a long discussion, I would think. So that's where it's at, that's the status.
Okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, is it, and 10 is the issue's on fire, and 1, it's ice cold?
Well, you're asking me? I'll
I
go
think
5.
you're
I'll go
putting-
5.
Yeah, right in the middle.
Lukewarm.
As I say, that's putting him on the spot that,
So,
So you think
Yeah.
it would be, you're indifferent about whether or not,
no, I'm not indifferent, I just.
you just said you were
I
a
was-
5.
I was picking the middle of the road.
Oh, okay.
So, at this time, you know, we're not going back right now and looking at that. If that were to come up, we would have a lot of discussions with this board,
Okay.
so. Mr. Sheriff, you just allow me two things. One, I think we probably should set a meeting date, maybe the 1st of December or mid-December, not only for the recommendation from the subcommittee, but Mark Ewing with KU
Yeah.
Yeah.
sent, and I just got it today, a copy of it, is sending a request to the city to develop a landing area for drones.
Okay.
I need to get that to you, and maybe we can have Mark come to that meeting and do a presentation at that point. And then,
He's proposing on the pre-existing parallel taxiway to 119 from the west ramp towards 1533.
right,
Now,
and
That,
That's all I know.
you mean, you're talking about on the grassy area? by
yes,
the- by
he
the
just
great
wants
trees?
us to mow the grass real short
Okay.
so they can use it.
And-
Take off and land there, and then they'll operate over that wet area to
Yeah.
the north and west of.
And is there was a tether set up there on 2 poles. Is that still being utilized?
I don't know, I know
Yeah,
there
because
was,
that-
but I don't
that's-
know.
That would be kind of in that same experimental
area,
area that we had a few years ago.
Jeff, I don't know if this is beyond your expertise. Are we talking about commercial drones here?
I think it's
I think we're talking about tests and experimental drones.
experimental,
Yeah.
like.
From aerospace engineering.
Okay,
So
okay.
I think maybe we'll wait till let him do his
Yeah, I
presentation
think so
that way,
too.
instead of jumping it. So that.
But I
that's
had the
pretty neat.
same reaction that Ron Renz just did.
All
And then the
right.
second thing, the last thing in your packet, the mayor received a letter from Alliance for Aviation Across America. They want the city to sign a letter opposing air traffic control privatization. The letter is attached. I don't know if anybody is familiar with this issue, if you want to make a recommendation to have the commissioner or the mayor sign the letter, or the commission, I guess, approve it, or if you want to consider that at your next meeting as well. I don't, they all say it's, always urgent, and they always give us it the day before they need it, but I don't know.
Well, it's 2997, House resolution, and it's supposed to go before Congress next week.
Oh,
And I am gonna email you guys tomorrow about it, because I got something from Ed Bolin at NBAA. And they got it set up so it's really easy to contact your congressman. And I think the Kansas delegation is on board for opposition to it, with the exception of Lynn Jenkins.
Can I make a comment on that?
Sure. I think you can.
This is a key issue that will affect general aviation in this country. I've seen it affect general aviation in Canada. It killed it. If you want to kill general aviation, don't support this. Don't contact your congressman. I'd recommend that you anybody that's involved in aviation, contact your congressman, especially Lynn Jenkins, because this is a House resolution, not a Senate resolution. Both senators are on board for not privatizing ATC. Lynn Jenkins, I believe, I don't think she's come out publicly, but I believe she will vote and support the privatization of ATC. It will kill general aviation. It will drive up costs. I just went to Canada where they have private ATC. It cost me $600 for a weekend.
Was that landing fees?
Combination of landing fees, ATC, that sort of thing. I've seen that happen in Germany. You land in Germany with a small general aviation airplane, it's $150 every time your wheels touch the ground.
It is not good for airports in Kansas.
Yeah.
It's not good for small aircraft. It's a bad deal.
Yeah.
It gives control to air traffic control to the powers that be in the airlines. The airlines are the ones that are pushing for it.
So contact Lynn Jenkins, tell her to vote no to 2997.
Well, does the mayor need some response back from us?
Well, there's I guess two ways we can go, just so we can, if this is happening like next week, because our commission meeting is until the 2nd, is until Tuesday. And I'd have to see if we could get this on the agenda, but if the board wants to recommend to the city commission to
Oppose.
oppose, what is it, 29?
2997, I think.
2997.
2997,
Oppose the privatization
Then you
of
can
air
do
traffic
that.
control.
The other, and within the same motion, you could also, if it's not gonna work to get to the mayor, maybe you could authorize the airport board chair to sign a letter, or to sign the letter. And then we'll have it covered that way. And then we'll be able to get a letter out by the end of the week or first next week.
Now, if I sign the letter, it still goes through the commissioner, the mayor, before it gets sent out.
Yes. But it won't take an act of the commission necessarily. So I'll have to check and see how that works.
Okay.
But if you want to take action tonight, I didn't know how familiar you were with this, but obviously you are. So if you want to make that
Well, I
recommendation,
think a
that's
few
fine.
of us are.
Well,
No.
you know, at the airport
I'm on board.
conference, it came up in virtually every section.
Yeah.
And
Every
even,
workshop.
even the FAA personnel, brought it up and, walked a thin line.
You know, this is what Sullenberger's been talking about
Right.
on TV, in commercials and paid advertisements. The Thunderbirds, the Blue Angels have come out against it, former commanders of those organizations have come out against it. There's all kinds of people fighting it. It has been the top priority for the National Business Aviation Association for the last 6 months. I went out to DC a year and a half ago in January to meet with the Kansas delegation on the topic with a number of people from Kansas. Russ Meyer was in the group. So there's strong opposition to it, but there's a powerful lobby in DC in support of it.
What are the 2 or 3 big arguments for?
They say they can do a better job and a quicker job of taking care of the air traffic control in the United States.
For less money.
There's a lot of misinformation out there from Schuster as well in the
Right.
groups. They're saying it's gonna save money.
Right.
The Congressional Accounting Office, the CBO came out, it's gonna cost $100 billion more with private ATC than with the current ATC system that we have. And what it is, the airlines wanna control ATC because then they can start prioritizing who can land at airports and who can't, who has access to airports and who can't. Let me give you a horror story, Toronto International in Canada. There's 4 GA slots a day. That's it. Think about that, what happened to Kansas City, to Washington DC, to Dallas, Texas. If that's the only number, you'd shut down general aviation. General aviation contributes to the economy of this country. If you look at Fortune 500 companies, the ones that operate airplanes are more profitable than the ones that don't. That's just the way it is. It's not because they operate the airplanes, it's the mentality of the companies, why they have airplanes in the first place, what makes them more profitable. But without airplanes, this economy in this country will shut down. This state of Kansas builds more airplanes than most of the rest of the world. It will really hurt Kansas economy if this happens, big time.
Well, since we're gathered and we have a quorum, do you think that we should vote and make a recommendation, or?
Yeah.
Okay. What the recommendation would be to authorize?
I think it's a twofold recommendation, is what Chuck is saying, is that we need to recommend to the mayor that she send a letter in opposition to HR 2997. And we urge her to get this letter out as soon as possible. If the notice requirements of the commission preclude her from doing that, then I think the letter should be sent by the chairman of this board.
That's the motion.
Yep.
So moved?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. I'll work with Chuck and get that wrapped up.
All I've got other than.
Thanks for bringing that to our attention.
Yep, if you guys wanna pick that meeting date, I looked at my calendar, December 14th is in the middle of the month.
Okay. How are we on other local
That's
activities?
Thursday, so it could be Wednesday. Which is the 13th.
How's your schedule?
Yeah, I'm leaving the 15th, so either day is.
Okay.
I'm supposed to be on jury duty.
I think we're after
I'll
the
be
court's
available
closed, so we'll be all
tonight,
right.
Yeah,
So, there you go.
Probably.
Get me out of jury duty?
yeah.
So,
So
the
thir-
13th or 14th? The 13th is a Wednesday?
Yeah,
Let's do it on Wednesday night.
Wednesday?
Do Wednesday the 13th.
Okay.
Okay.
it's not a basketball night,
I don't have the basketball schedule in here yet.
Uh-oh. So if it's a away game, we may be in trouble.
We got big TVs.
Got football
There
recruiting.
you go.
That was December?
Yeah.
December, yeah.
Yep.
And then we should probably at that meeting discuss the 4 meetings we have to have in 18.
18, get those lined out ahead of time, so quarterly.
And the next meeting will be back out there,
It
Perhaps.
should be.
perhaps,
We'll play
okay.
that by ear.
We might
Same
just-
time,
We might
maybe,
just do it here all the time.
same time, maybe a different
There you
place, okay.
Dan, did you ever get,
I really
did
gotta
you ever
go.
get put
Okay,
on
yeah,
the-
we're fine.
back
Thank
on
you.
the-
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
You did, okay.
We don't need a quorum to adjourn, so you're all right.
Okay, thanks.
Well, I was wondering if is there any other outstanding business that we need to address? All right, then, move to adjourn, seconded. All in favor?
Aye,
All right, we are adjourned.
okay.
All righty.
Sorry you're late.
Fine.